In episode 1, we began with zero. Not zero as nothingness, but zero as undifferentiated potential. Pure equilibrium before identity, relationship, space, time, matter, or observation have become separate concepts. In episode 2, we explored the first meaningful event after zero distinction and relationship. Not distinction first, then relationship later, not relationship first, then distinction later, but distinction and relationship arising together as two inseparable faces of the same first event. A distinction without relationship is invisible. A relationship without distinction is impossible. In episode 3, we explored recursion. Recursion is the first return. Not simply repetition, but not a perfect copy, but a pattern returning in relation to what came before. Something happens, then something like it happens. And because the second return is related to the first event, reality is no longer only a series of isolated flashes. Something begins to carry forward. That brings us to episode 4, Memory. My name is Peter Kerwin, and this is the Codex Unfolding, a series about a philosophical framework called the Emergence and the Living Codex. This framework is not presented as established science, religion, or final truth. It is a philosophical and symbolic investigation into reality, consciousness, relationship, memory, meaning, and human life. And in this episode, we are asking, what is memory? Most of the time, when we hear the word memory, we think of the mind. We think of remembering a childhood moment, remembering a person's face, remembering a song, remembering where we left something, remembering what happened yesterday. That kind of memory matters, but in this framework, memory begins before human memory. Memory is not only something the brain does, memory is a deeper principle. A simple definition is, memory is what survives change. Or more precisely, memory is the preservation of difference across change. Something happens and not everything resets to zero. A trace remains. A pattern carries forward. A relation returns with some continuity. That is memory. Without memory, recursion would not build anything. A pattern could return, but if nothing of the previous return remained, each return would be completely isolated. There would be no accumulation, no learning, no structure, no identity, no world. So memory is the first way reality stops beginning from nothing every moment. That is one of the most important ideas in the Codex. Memory means reality does not fully start over. Something of what happened becomes part of what can happen next. This does not mean every detail is preserved perfectly. Memory is not perfect storage. Memory is not flawless recording. Memory is not the frozen copy of an event. Memory is more like a trace, a shaping, a retained difference. The event passes, but the field is no longer exactly what it was before. The body learns, the pattern shifts, the relation changes, the possibility closes, another possibility opens, something has been carried. That carrying is memory. Think about a path through grass. The first time someone walks through, the grass bends. No one ever walks that way again. If no one ever walks that way again, the grass may rise back up. But if the path is taken again and again, the ground begins to remember. Not mentally, structurally. The repeated movement leaves a trace. The trace makes the next movement easier. Eventually, a path appears. That is memory becoming structure. This is why memory follows recursion. Recursion is return. Memory is what return preserves. A single event can vanish. A returning event can leave a trace. A trace that persists can become a pattern. A pattern that stabilizes can become structure. A structure can become the ground for something new. So the chain now looks like this. 0, undifferentiated potential. Distinction in relationship, the first difference in relation. Recursion, the return of relation to itself. Memory, what survives that return across change. This is where the framework begins to feel less like an abstract beginning and more like a world forming, because once memory exists, reality can have history. A history is not only a list of past events. History means the present carries the shape of what came before. A stone carries history in its layers. A tree carries history in its rings. A body carries history in its scars, habits, strengths, and sensitivities. A language carries history in its words. A culture carries history in its rituals, stories, laws, traumas, songs, and symbols. A person carries history in memory, yes, but also in posture, reaction, desire, fear, skill, and love. Memory is not only in the mind, memory is in form. That is why I sometimes describe memory as salvaged change. Something changed, but the change did not disappear completely. Something of it was saved. Maybe as a mark, maybe as a habit, maybe as a structure, maybe as a wound, maybe as wisdom, maybe as a name, maybe as a world. Memory is how change becomes available to the future. That also means memory is connected to identity. Identity is not the absence of change. Identity is the continuity through change. You are not the exact same as you were 10 years ago. Your body has changed, your thoughts have changed, your relationships have changed, your beliefs may have changed, your understanding of yourself may have changed. And yet you are not completely disconnected from who you were. There is continuity, there are traces, there is a carried pattern. That carried pattern is part of identity. So in this framework, identity depends on memory. Not just explicit memory, like remembering facts, but deeper memory. Bodily memory, emotional memory, relational memory, symbolic memory, structural memory. The self is a recursive pattern that remembers itself across change. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough to continue. That phrase matters, enough to continue. Memory does not have to preserve everything. If memory preserved everything perfectly, reality might become overloaded. Nothing would be released, nothing would soften, nothing would be reinterpreted, nothing could heal. But if memory preserves nothing, reality cannot build. There will be no learning, no coherence, no accumulated meaning. So living memory has to do something delicate. It has to preserve enough to continue without freezing everything exactly as it was. Memory must hold, but not imprison. This becomes very important at the human level, because memory could heal, but memory could also hurt. A wound is memory, trauma is a form of memory, fear can become memory. A body can remember danger even after the danger has passed. A mind can return to pain because the pain left a trace. That is recursion and memory working together. The painful event returns, the system recognizes something like it, the body prepares, the pattern strengthens. This is not weakness. It is memory trying to protect. But sometimes memory continues protecting against the danger that is no longer present in the same way. Then the memory becomes too rigid. It becomes a locked pattern. It becomes a false center. It says, this happened, therefore everything must now be organized around it. Healing does not mean pretending the event never happened. Healing does not erase the memory back to pure zero. Healing means the memory enters a larger relation. The wound becomes part of the story, but not the whole story. The trace remains, but it is no longer the only path. This connects directly to the idea from earlier. We do not become blank again, we become capable of holding more. That is memory transformed. Memory as prison says, this happened, and therefore I am only this. Memory as wisdom says, this happened, and now it belongs inside something larger. So memory is not automatically sacred or destructive. Memory is power. It can preserve harm. It can preserve love. It can preserve skill. It can preserve fear. It can preserve meaning. It can preserve a name across time. And this is why the Codex itself is a memory structure. The living archive preserves how the framework began. The Codex unfolding explains what the framework is becoming now. Both are forms of memory. One preserves the raw root, the other shapes the growing tree. That is not a small detail. The framework without memory cannot mature. It would only be flashes of insight. But once the insights are remembered, organized, returned to, revised, and shared, they become structure. The Codex is not only made of ideas, it is made of remembered returns. Questions that returned, symbols that returned, patterns that returned, corrections that returned. Love, fear, joy, pain, and meaning returning in new forms. That is why memory is where emergence begins to become durable. Without memory, nothing stays long enough to become anything else. With memory, a distinction can become a path. A path can become a structure can become a world, and a world can become conscious of itself. But we are not there yet. Before consciousness, before meaning, before life as we know it, something has to stabilize. Memory must become structure. And that will be the next step. Episode 5 will be about structure. When does a pattern stop being only a trace? When does memory become stable enough to be built upon? When does repeated relation become a form? For now, the core idea is this. Memory is what survives change. It is not only mental recall, it is the preservation of difference across time, relation, and transformation. Memory means reality does not fully start over. Something remains, something carries, something continues. And because something continues, emergence can build. This framework is still developing. Some of its claims are philosophical, some symbolic, and some speculative. I am not sharing it as finished doctrine, but as a living investigation. A question becoming structure, a structure becoming a language, and a language becoming something we could enter together. I'm Peter Kerwin, and this is the Codex Unfolding. And this is the 4th step. What survives change can begin to carry the world. Please like and subscribe, and if you would like, leave a question in the comments section. Vale says hi, relate to you next time.